on the deal to leave the EU. With me, of course, are my two guests, the Conservative Leave campaigner Theresa Villiers, who is also a member of the Cabinet, and with me Barry Gardiner, who shadows Liam Fox in international trade. First of all, your response to the speech, Theresa Villiers. Have you got pretty much what you wanted?
I think it's a great speech. I have to say that I feel quite emotional. The fact that this is yet another big step towards becoming an independent country again. The confirmation that we're leaving the internal market, the reiteration that we're going to take back control of making our own laws, interspersed with sort of sensible pragmatism about phased implementation and these kind of questions. I think it's a very welcome speech.
Except, of course, if the EU and other member states don't quite give Theresa May and her government what they want in terms of that crucial free trade deal with the rest of Europe.
Well, the Prime Minister has spoken quite tough terms about that, but it's very clear that it's in the interest of both sides to reach a sensible accommodation on trade. And as the Prime Minister pointed out, it really would be Europe acting against its own interest to punish us. The effect of punishing us leaves them poorer, particularly our nearest neighbour in Ireland. So I think it was right to send that message. I hope that the EU does see sense on that. But even if they don't give us a trade deal, then we trade on most favoured nation status under the WTO rules. Other countries in the world do more business with Europe than we do on the basis of that WTO
Although
system.
she said she wouldn't like the UK to fall off a cliff edge economically, and then there would have to be some sort of transitional arrangement. Are you disappointed, Barry Gardiner? We're out of the single market, which is not what Labour wanted, even if you've accepted it, and we're out, certainly as full members of the customs union, presumably because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do the free trade deals that she wants us to do.
That certainly appears to be the case. Look, I want to start by welcoming one central aspect of the speech, and that is that she has committed to 2 votes in Parliament, one in the House of Commons and one in the House of Lords. I think that is a critical concession, and I'm delighted that she's made that, because it certainly was not on the cards a few months ago. I think when she talks about frictionless access into European markets, we have to look at what this new free trade agreement arrangement with the EU is that she's proposing. Because frictionless access means that you would have to have a harmonisation or a recognition of the equivalence of the standards and the regulations in each of the countries.
And that's possible.
It's possible, but what it does mean is that we are still accepting the regulations put in place by Brussels as being acceptable for the UK. And that does rather go against what she spoke of, and I noted it here, the parliamentary democracy and self-determination, which were the key messages that she wanted to get across.
Can I just put you on this issue of a vote at the end of the deal? We've had the 2-year negotiation. Let's assume for a moment that there is a deal to put to Parliament. Is there any scenario under which you could see Labour voting that down?
Look, we want to respect the will of the British people that we come out of the European Union. We need, and here the Prime Minister was right to say this is not a time for opposition's sake.
Right. So
it is a time for the opposition to do what I hope that Her Majesty's opposition always does, which is to oppose the government in the interests of the British people.
But if you thought it was a bad deal, would you vote it down?
Well, that's precisely the point. If we think it is the wrong deal, if we think it has gone about things to make Britain not richer, but poorer, if it's going to actually sacrifice people's jobs instead of create jobs, then of course it would be our obligation at that point, and by giving the vote, she automatically assumes that there's a possibility of the deal being voted down.
Right, and I'll come to you in just a moment, Theresa Villiers. Both of you obviously staying for this special programme throughout. I can just say that the Prime Minister, having finished her speech, is now answering questions from the press, and if there are any crucial answers she gives to those questions, we will of course play them to you on this programme. We can now talk to UKIP's Deputy Chair, Suzanne Evans. Were you pleased with that speech?
Yes, I was. I was chuckling at some of it, to be honest, because it seemed like she was channeling UKIP. There were various phrases there which I've used myself again and again. And I think her 12 priorities were all extremely sound, good priorities for a proper, clean, what some people have called hard Brexit. So
Right,
yes, overwhelmingly welcome the speech.
Right, so we don't need UKIP anymore. There won't be any backsliding. You're pretty well signed up, you say, to everything she said. Therefore, there really isn't any need for UKIP, who Paul Nuttall, your leader, said would be there to stop her falling away from her promises.
Well, you know, I think what the PM set out today was, as I say, very sound principles. But let's not forget, it's not the PM who's got carte blanche to deliver Brexit on her own. And this is what UKIP is concerned about. She is surrounded by a very strong, very influential establishment. We're talking about the hardline Remainers. We're talking about the Supreme Court. We're talking about the House of Lords.
Yeah, but she dealt with those issues, didn't she?
Well, I don't think she did in the sense that, of course, you know, what is she going to do if these people kick up a fuss? And there's no doubt that UKIP is still very strong on Brexit. We have to be strong on Brexit, and we have to make sure that we get the right Brexit.
Okay.
And it's still very much, I think, for us, a job of holding her feet to the fire. We've heard a lot of talk today, and I absolutely welcome the talk. It's the right kind of talk, but we still have to see the action. There's also, of course, what she was talking about, these transitional arrangements.
Right. Do you support the idea of a transitional arrangement, or is that for you still half in, half out?
Well, it depends what this transition looks like, doesn't it? And we look forward to seeing exactly what it does look like. For instance, something as fundamental a principle as the free movement of people, if that's a transitional scheme, we could potentially see higher levels of immigration from the European Union than we've ever seen before.
Right. What about being a member of certain programmes? Just to take you through some of the programmes, there were implications there that we could stay part of Europol when she talked about security arrangements. That would mean we'd still be under the European Court of Justice when it comes to contractual arrangements. Would you support that?
No, absolutely not. That's completely unacceptable. And what I was very pleased to see was Theresa May, right at the outset of her speech, made it quite clear that Britain was not going to be subject to the power of any European court. So I think that was a fundamental
But we would be if we
principle
stayed part of Europol, wouldn't we?
Look, we've always said that, and I think Theresa May made it clear, that she wants to cooperate in terms of issues of security and defence with the European Union, but we are going to be out of the EU. So it's a fundamental principle, isn't it?
All right.
For me, I heard her say it's about free trade. If we cannot have free trade agreements and make our own free trade agreements, then that means we're going to be out of the customs union.
She did say, though, that the UK wouldn't sign up to full membership of the customs union. Would you consider that to still be half in, half out of the EU if we were signed up to certain sectors, certain industries, in order to remain part of the customs union for those in a way that Turkey is?
Well, again, it depends exactly what the negotiation looks like.
Right, but if we were still a bit in the customs union, would that not be good enough for you?
British businesses who want to export to the European Union are in any case going to have to meet all the EU requirements in order to export to that market. If our membership of the customs union, if that's the full extent of it, then frankly it's not going to make that much difference.
Right. I mean, in terms of contributions to the EU coffers, she ruled out making vast annual contributions to the EU. But what if there were some contributions, perhaps every other year? Would that be acceptable to you?
Again, let's see what that negotiated deal looks like. I think it is arguably fair and reasonable that while we are negotiating our way out, that we still contribute in some way. For me personally, and I think for UKIP, we'd say there should be an absolute cut-off point where we have absolutely zero contributions to the European Union. But again, you know, I think the direction of travel was a very hardline stance from May on our actually getting out of the EU, but also a conciliatory one as well. I was quite struck by how she did make some conciliatory noises to the European Union as well. And I think actually now the ball is in their court. We are being very reasonable from our perspective. It's now up to the EU to show some reasonable behaviour back.
Suzanne Evans from UKIP, thank you very much. Do you still think that we will be half in the EU if we don't fully come out of the customs union?
Well, as I said before, I think ultimately our destination is out of the customs union because I suspect it'll come with too many strings attached for it to be reconcilable with a leave vote. But
even if it hits big industries like aerospace and car manufacturing, who do rely on an extensive supply chain within the EU customs union?
But there are many countries around the world who sell more to the EU without being in the customs union.
Yes, but how disruptive would it be if they had to prove rules of origin on every single component of a car or a plane?
This is what American producers manage to do, and they sell vast amounts of products in those industries to the European Union. The TIR system means that thousands of lorries are passing in and out of countries which have customs barriers without even slowing down. There are technological ways to ensure that the rules of origin system doesn't have to be a huge regulatory burden.
Right, and Norway and Switzerland, neither of whom are within the customs union, and they have, a multitude of free trade deals. They manage it.
Indeed, I think Norway and Switzerland are very different economies from the UK. And of course, if you look at the US automotive sector, contrary to what Theresa was saying, they don't sell vast amount of cars into the European Union. Most of the cars in the European Union are actually from within the European Union, created within the European Union. The country of origin rules are really critical here because our suppliers who feed into products, not just in the automotive sector, but products that are going from Europe to third countries outside, will begin to see them excluded from the supply chain within the next 9 months because it's an 18-month supply chain.
All right.
That's a serious problem for our business,
We'll come back
and the
to you.
Prime Minister mustn't take that seriously.
We'll come back to you in a moment, but let's get some more reaction, this time from the government. The Work and Pensions Secretary, Damien Green, who was at this morning's Cabinet meeting, joins me now from Lancaster House. Welcome to the Daily Politics. You were, of course, a Remainer before the referendum, now a member of the government. The Prime Minister said we're not going to be half in, half out. So can you clarify for us, is the UK going to leave fully the customs union?
Well, as she said, we're going to leave the single market. The customs union is more complex. We're going to leave the parts of it that stop us signing trade deals with other countries in the world. We've seen a lot of interest in free trade deals with Britain, and there are certain parts of the customs union that do that, but the Prime Minister made clear there are other parts of the customs union that we will be negotiating about, that we may wish to stay in. She's not got any preconceived notions of how best we do that, but certainly there are parts of the customs union that we won't want to stay in because we want to sign these free trade deals with other big economies around the world.
And because that's also an admission that otherwise key industries like aerospace and car manufacturing could be harmed in Britain if we came out totally of the customs union.
Well, she made the point that what we want to achieve is as near frictionless borders as we can. Clearly, there are, as you say, many big important industries, both in this country and in other countries around Europe, that depend on supply chains in different European countries. And obviously, we want as few customs barriers as we can in practical terms for those. And so that'll be obviously an important part of the negotiation, which illustrates actually that the best kind of deal is not just good for Britain, it's good for other European countries as well, because clearly that frictionless trade provides prosperity and jobs in all countries.
Now, and can you be clear in terms of contributions, financial contributions, that could continue to be made to the EU? It is clear from what she said that she's not ruling out altogether some financial contributions being made in order for us to have preferential access to the single market. Is that right?
It wasn't quite that. No, she said that we wouldn't make contributions in the traditional sense,
no,
but that there may well be individual projects that we'd want to get involved in,
like,
and that obviously, we would look. Well, I mean, let's see what's on offer. I don't want to pick individual sectors or individual projects now, but in no circumstances it may be to Britain's advantage to make a financial contribution to specific projects.
Right, although that was a red line for certainly some of the Brexiteers before and after, in fact, the referendum. So on that basis, there could be some special contributions that are made in order to have some sort of advantages for certain sectors or industries. And she said that we might also want to remain part of some EU programmes. That's right too, is it?
Well, that's specifically what she was talking about when she said, she wasn't talking about sectors, she said that there may be specific programmes that it would be to Britain's advantage to be part of, and that's where it may be to our advantage to make contributions.
So in a way, we're not
programs.
Right. So we are still a bit in the EU in that case. If we're still making the odd contribution here or there, we're still part of perhaps some of the EU programmes, some of which could still be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. We're half in, half out. We're not actually having this clean Brexit or hard Brexit that's been talked about.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think the phrase she used a lot was that we will be in a strategic partnership with the EU, that Britain will be out of the EU, but we will obviously be friendly, we're neighbours, fellow democracies, so we want a strategic partnership. Now as strategic partners, we may say, here's a project, here's a programme that members of the EU and a non-member of the EU, like Britain, might want to join in. The EU does sign deals with countries that are not in the EU, so it's not unknown for that to happen. Britain will be outside the EU, but will be a friendly strategic partner of the EU and its member states.
Right. Damien Green, thank you very much for joining us there outside of Lancaster House. Just briefly, Theresa Villiers, when we look at the hard border, or the common, I should say, travel area between Ireland and Northern Ireland, she said that there wouldn't be a hard border. How can she guarantee that if we're coming out of the single market and almost all of the customs union?
We've had a common travel area for nearly 100 years, so
Yes.
it predated EU membership. There's no reason why we can't continue it. Yes, there's a degree of risk of illegal migration by having an open and free-flowing border, but it's perfectly possible to manage that risk without border checkpoints. The reality is the key thing is how you cooperate with the immigration authorities on both sides of the border. For around 100 years, those immigration authorities have worked together to try and secure the external borders of the common travel area. That will continue. That's how we need to operate.
Let's leave that there because we can now talk to the Lib Dem leader, Tim Farron. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Looking lovely and sunny out there, if a little cold, no doubt, by the Houses of Parliament. So, these are all your worst fears come true, Tim Farron. We're leaving the single market. We are leaving, if not totally, the customs union. It's the end of that kind of relationship with the EU.
Yeah, it seems to be the extreme version of Brexit that Theresa May was briefing in advance of this speech. And that is incredibly disappointing for anybody who thinks democracy matters, because what she has done is taken the views of 51.9% of the people who voted to leave the European Union last June and assume they all meant the same as Nigel Farage, and assume they wanted an extreme Brexit that was not on the ballot paper. So this is a theft of democracy as well as an attack on our economy. And to decide to do this without seeking the will and the opinion of the British people at the end of it is all the more offensive. What she did say, the only two really substantial things she said in the speech was, one, that she was going for the hard Brexit and ripping us out of the single market. The other was that Parliament would get a vote on the deal at the end of all this,
yes.
which really is saying that politicians can have a bit of democracy at the end of this process, but the people can't.
Right, but
and
you're
we
elected.
Take the view,
yes.
We take the view that you start this process with democracy, as we did last June, but you do not end it with a stitch-up at some point
Because
in the
you want to
near
see a
future.
second referendum, although...
I want a first referendum on a deal we know nothing about yet.
Right.
All we know is that Theresa May has waved the white flag on the most important thing when it comes to our future relationship with Europe. Do we want to be in or out of the single market? Business is united in saying we should be in the single market. 90% of the
It's
electorate,
not united
if you
completely.
believe
That's not true to say they are 100%
I'm sure you could find
united.
somebody, but
More than somebody.
90% of the people of all kinds in the most recent survey before Christmas say they want us to be in the single market. So
Yeah, all
to
right.
choose this extreme version is a theft of democracy.
All right, let's ask-
And the only way to close it is by asking people to say yes or no to the deal at the end of the process.
Right, well, let's ask what you can do about it, Tim Farron, as leader of the Liberal Democrats. Will you be instructing your peers to vote against triggering Article 50, which would start the negotiation process to try and block this happening?
So we've been very clear that we will use Parliament to amend whatever the government puts in front of us to ensure Britain gets the best deal, so that Britain does argue, for example, and fight its corner and business's corner to
stay in the single market. Right, so you will block it. You will block triggering Article 50, just to be clear.
No, well, I'll be very clear with you. Our red line is on a referendum. If the British people are not given their say at the end of all this, if the will of the people is ignored, if the people are cut out of this process, and this is a stitch-up between politicians and bureaucrats in Brussels and Whitehall, then we will not vote. We will vote against anything that cuts the people out of this process.
Right, so you want that second referendum. That is the red
we
line.
want a first referendum on the deal. Sorry to be pedantic.
Semantic.
It's
okay,
not about
but
a
on the
rerun,
deal,
but it's important. We're going to get a deal.
Yeah.
We know nothing what it's going to look like. We have some idea of what Theresa May will and won't fight for. She won't fight for Britain's future in the European single market, which is bad for business. But we've got no clue really as to what it will look like at the end. Right. Why should the British people have that forced upon them when they've had no say?
Parliament is full of elected representatives like your good self. Why isn't that enough in terms of giving you the say on the final deal?
Well, if I'm honest with you, because we started with a referendum, I think that's how you've got to end up. We can't be in a situation where
to reverse the process that we will have been through?
If you think about it, if either the courts or even Parliament, elected though half of it is, were to, in inverted commas, frustrate the will of the people, that would be wrong and counterproductive.
All right.
The only way Britain is staying in the European Union, it would appear, even the single market now, is if the British people tell the government that is what they want. The Liberal Democrats are the only people providing the vehicle for that democracy to take place.
Right, you're representing, as you say, the 48% who voted
and I think probably
to remain.
A majority of the leavers who want us to stay in the single market.
All right, well, obviously we don't know what the numbers are in terms of who wanted to stay in the single market.
We don't, but it's a lot more than none.
Right, well, I'm sure it is more than none. You may not like it, in fact I know you don't like it, but the issue of immigration was important one way or another. And do you not accept Theresa May is responding in some way to what many people felt was a need to take back some control of immigration and open borders?
I think what she's not doing, and what nobody else seems to be doing, is making the case for British people and our freedom of movement, British business, British students.
But answer the question
and
on
our
immigration.
freedom of movement. So, but if you are concerned about immigration, it is a two-way street, and nobody seems to be arguing the best deal for us. And if you take Theresa May's line that freedom of movement is some kind of a red line, then don't accept what the other side say over membership of the single market. Go and argue Britain's case. If you want to be in the single market, and you don't want some of the other stuff that other people in Europe say we've got to have, don't just accept it.
All right.
Don't wave the white flag. Go and fight Britain's corner. She's waved the white flag and given up.
Tim Farron, thank you very much, the Lib Dem leader there. Well, some had suggested in advance of today's speech that the Prime Minister might not tell us much. She hadn't already revealed about how the UK will approach the Brexit process. But as it turned out, she did make a number of significant and explicit statements, as we've already discussed. So let's have a look at some of the key things we have learned from the Prime Minister's speech. Firstly, Theresa May confirmed the final Brexit deal will be put to a vote in both Houses of Parliament. On the big subject of immigration, she said Brexit must mean control of the number of people who come to Britain from Europe, although she didn't give any further figures on that. She said the UK will pursue a bold free trade agreement with the EU, but she confirmed that, as expected, that will not mean membership of the single market. Also on trade, the Prime Minister wants to be able to strike deals with non-EU countries, so Britain will not retain full membership of the customs union. Instead, she wants some form of customs agreement with the EU. Theresa May also said the UK may continue to make payments to the EU after Brexit, but they won't be vast, whatever that means. And finally, on transition, she wants a phased process of implementation on any deal to avoid a disruptive cliff edge. Just finally, before the end of the programme, Theresa Villiers, your thoughts on what she said in regard to a warning to the EU if there were attempts to block a deal or make a bad deal that wasn't going to be advantageous to Britain, underlining Philip Hammond, the Chancellor's comments that actually Britain could take action to protect the economy. Was that wise to threaten when she had EU diplomats sat there in front of her?
Well, it was quite tough. It was a very sort of tough warning. I think it's only sort of setting out the facts in terms of the options that would be open to us as an independent country able to take our own decisions on
right,
this kind of matters.
And become, as Labour have called it, a bargain basement economy, making sure that corporation tax was even lower than is being proposed. Is that what you would see?
Well, we've set a direction of travel which in any event brings down corporation tax. I think what I doubt would be on the agenda would be sort of large-scale deregulation. I think we would certainly want to look at the body of EU regulation and see whether it's proportionate, whether we want to do things slightly differently, but in a number of areas I think we'd keep it. So I don't see that it would be a race to the bottom in terms of regulation.
Will you ally yourself with Tim Farron and the Liberal Democrats in terms of what he was saying?
No, I think what the Prime Minister said was that if the EU were not to give us a good deal, it would be an act of calamitous self-harm. Those were her words.
And you agree with that?
And she threatened 5 or 6 times. She used our intelligence services 5 or 6 times to back up that threat. You rightly pointed out that she has spoken of a deregulated tax haven, backing up what Philip Hammond has already threatened. I believe that that threat, combined with this threat that maybe we would withdraw our cooperation on intelligence services, is a deeply damaging, huge moral mistake as well as a political one.
All right. Well, thank you very much to both of you for sitting here with me while Theresa May gave that